When I first started 10 years ago, I wanted to find something that was going to prove me wrong, because I wasn't convinced that what I was doing was it. I was a tennis coach who got shown by the loveliest, sweetest, most amazing voice that could speak to me things, that never asked me what to do, but asked me to put them to the test. And when I was sitting in the toilet, that came, the heavens shine on those whose hearts bleed with love and compassion, bestowed upon you is my kingdom. Sounded a bit religious. And then they told me what it really meant, and they said, whoa, that's huge. And they said, don't believe in us, don't think of us, don't know us by name, just listen and apply. If it works, do it. If it doesn't, tell us to rack off and we will never come back again.
Hello and welcome to this video where I'll be introducing Serge Benhayon's teaching, his spoken teachings, which he does in front of live audiences, and the one that you heard was a recording that was sent out to a lot of followers, and they do, his group Universal Medicine does a lot of this. Now, the importance of hearing Serge Benhayon speak for yourself is will help us to understand his very, very strong influence on the people who follow him, and the techniques he uses to change their belief system, to have them come around to his way of thinking. So really, that was that clip that we began with, where he talks about the voices that he heard. This is, in any other context, might be interpreted as a pathological event. However, for Serge Benhayon, he's been able to perform this amazing feat of salesmanship and turn that event into a very, very successful multi-million-dollar international business. He even talks about when he heard those voices in 1999, he was fit and happy, which, maybe he was, but he was also coming out of bankruptcy. So this whole basis for his business, this spiritual revelation, has been very, very lucrative for him. So we'll get on with the rest of it. We'll hear a little bit more from that particular lecture where he talks a little bit more about these voices, and then we're going to look at another lecture that he did where we'll be getting an introduction to his teachings.
I accepted and started living it, and it started to change my life. And I decided I can't play tennis, because I could really feel at that stage my wrist was 2 holes different to my watch. So if I took my watch off from my left hand and put it on my right, there were 2 holes difference. Huge right arm, much bigger than now, of course. My right lat was huge. One of my calves was bigger than the other, because feeding tennis balls all day. Backhand, forehand, all with a right leg. So I was disproportionate, but I was super fit, very happy and content. But this energy showed me I was way out, totally disharmonious. You can't tell a person who's super fit, can play tennis 8 to 10 hours a day, that they're not well. It's very difficult. But this energy showed me I was all over the place, and I was totally disharmonious and actually in pain that I couldn't feel. And it proved it to me. So I started listening to it. And they just kept saying, don't do what we say, apply it. And if it works, keep it. What doesn't work, don't. And they taught me over a year, slowly, not giving their names away, just listening and teaching me to learn to listen through energy, through feeling gentleness and through love. And that at any time that became anything different, to ignore it. And they would allow sometimes false ones to come through, soft, blissful voices that were telling me beautiful things. And I fell for them sometimes, and then they would laugh and they would say, that wasn't us. And that's where I learned the term, suck eggs. And then I got taught, don't rely on them. They're there to inspire, not to instruct. And that they're only going to be there if I allow that to be. And then they said, we're never going to come back until, they said, we won't, now that we've taught you everything, or enough, I will only come back if your energy is equal to us. So I had to work hard. If I played tennis, I could never be in that energy. But if I walked myself and just be myself, they were there. And then I learned that there was a lot to play with energy, and there was a lot to find out about energy. And there was this loveliness about being aligned to something that was truthful, yet never imposing, never instructing, never telling me what to do. And then as I got to feel all that, and I got to feel my body, then they said, now you never have to listen to us, because everything we are is now in your body. Now listen to your own body. And I said, how do you do that? And I said, it's impulse. It's just energy. You don't have to think, it's there. And it's already there. Everything. You don't have to work anything out. You don't have to know in detail. So the impulse is to start the healing, to start universal medicine, to start the teachings, the workshops, the modalities, and everything comes from my body. My impulses, my energy. So it's an energy that impulses. So how do I get the impulse? I feel what is the need. The impulse is there ready to serve it. All I have to do is tune into someone, and whatever they need, the impulse is there. I don't have to question it. It's just there. And that's how I do the readings, you know. I'm a little bit famous for, and getting it right, energetically, what's going on, illness and disease, and so forth. And I do readings all over the world and so forth.
Right, and you heard a little bit of a sales plug at the end of that excerpt for he's famous around the world. You know, he's a little bit famous around the world for these readings that he does, from this power that he developed from listening to these voices. Now, yes, that's why we're listening to these this audio, because we do need to understand this. How does somebody influence people to believe things that are very bizarre? Just to put this in context, that lecture was called Esoteric Medicine 1. It was delivered in 2010 and part of a series. Roughly once a month, Universal Medicine holds these UniMed weekends. These lectures are part of the teachings delivered on those weekends, and Universal Medicine would record these 2-hour lectures, turn them into podcasts or subscriptions which followers would then listen to. And a lot of them were listening to them, they subscribe as a podcast, they listen to the same lecture every day for a month until the next one comes out, with earbuds, or often playing them in their cars, so repeatedly. Now, later we'll hear excerpts from Esoteric Medicine 7, also from 2010. And I've chosen a few excerpts from that because they kind of encapsulate a fair bit of Serge Benhayon's Universal Medicine or Esoteric Medicine teachings. And it does get pretty bizarre. There'll be talk about supernatural concepts, and also some stuff that's pretty antisocial. Now, also let's understand about these lectures. So these were 2-hour podcasts, I suppose. What you just heard came at the end of a 2-hour. It was in the last 10 minutes of this 2-hour lecture. We're going to hear another little excerpt from that in a moment, before we move on to the other material. So it comes at the end. Now, at the beginning of these lectures, the first part is usually spent in a group meditation. So Serge Benhayon would lead his followers through a group meditation, and what that does is puts them into a relaxed state where they feel good, but it also increases their suggestibility. And also, it's not just the meditation that does that, it's the effect of the whole group dynamic. So Universal Medicine, when you first encounter them, they're very, very friendly, loving, smiling, happy. A lot of them look very wealthy. They're quite well groomed. So, there's this aura of you being in a kind of a group of successful and happy people that are interested in you. So that's what's called love bombing. You're told that you're amazing. They really want you to come along and join their group. So there's that, and then there's also the esoteric healing modalities themselves. And a lot of the people in these lectures have already been introduced to that, or had already developed a habit, an esoteric healing kind of habit, where they're receiving these hands-on healings which put them into a fairly deeply relaxed state. Plus, then they're listening to these recordings quite a lot. So what comes up in the next small excerpt is we get introduced to the idea of connection and disconnection. So Serge Benhayon continues his sales pitch for this revelation that gave him this special knowledge and kind of special authority. And what he's saying next is that his followers can be part of that. He even says they can be part of that equally. We'll talk about that later and in the initiation scale, but he's drawing them in to be part of that. But he also anticipates that loved ones, even themselves, they'll have doubts. They'll have their own doubts. Their families and friends will probably have doubts and have questions. And he starts to warm them up for that and get them ready. Because when you connect with universal medicine and these unusual ideas and some very antisocial ideas, then really you connect with this group, you will have to disconnect with a lot of other things, relationships, and also a way of life and a way of thinking that you had before.
Yeah? And that is available to us all equally, not just me. Because then they said, once you have this, there's one warning. You can't keep it to yourself. That was the only condition they said to look out for. Not they didn't say, hey, look out, if you keep this to yourself, we'll come and punish you. It wasn't like that. They said, once you have this, because it's not yours, you can't keep it. You can live it, you can maximize it, and you can be it in every way, but you never ever will have it for yourself. It is by nature to be given out, because it's too big to hold, to contain. So you can express it, but you can't contain it. Hence why we started what we started. And so all of that from one person. And when you read the testimonials, pretty awesome. That all of that ripple effect. Now it's all done by the students, of course, connecting to the same energy. But what if there's more people choosing to walk that way? To not compromise towards their partners or their children or their parents or anybody else, and saying, truth is truth. And if you really love me, you will be with me. And if you're not, that's okay. But I have to walk this way because that's my choice. And if we can do that, then we create a magnificent effect for everybody, because your body then becomes inspirational.
Right, so he's selling his followers the idea that they can be magnificent and inspirational the way that he is, successful the way that he is, but also, be part of this kind of grandiosity and these grandiose entitlements. Now, Serge Benhayon didn't finish high school, and it shows. He has no scientific or medical understanding or knowledge. It's all invented, and we'll see that later on in some of the, that he doesn't know what he's talking about. Now, but that doesn't stop him from accessing patients who are very, very ill. And what he's promising to his students is that they can have this kind of entitlement as well. They can be special like him and have these strong powers that, can influence these very, very ill people.
It's awesome. But what wasn't awesome is the enormous number of cancer cases I did in January and psychosis. Enormous. I was going to have some time off. I ended up working in my days off to fit in all the new cancers, an enormous amount of suicides and psychoses just in January.
Okay, before we move on to the excerpts from Esoteric Medicine 7, time to talk about Serge Benhayon's linguistic technique. And, you know, he's not a sophisticated bloke, but it is quite a sophisticated technique. Whether it's deliberate or not, who knows? You know, that's always going to be the big question. And whether he believes what he's talking about, I don't think we'll ever have an answer to that question. But it's something that we all debate. Does this guy really believe this stuff? Now, okay, so the techniques he used, you know, in this vocal, you know, his delivery, his verbal delivery, his voice is his voice itself. It's soft, and it has kind of a variable tone, and his syntax is irregular, and so that's part of the technique, that it kind of lulls you into this kind of, you know, it kind of gets you in, but it also is a little bit of a relaxing voice. It's sort of a meditative voice in a way. So that's part of it. The grammar, Serge's grammar is atrocious. It's really bad, and you know, everyone notices that. And if you ever read his books, the grammar is terrible. But when he speaks, you'll notice, you know, that's why I put the text up as well, so you can see that he mixes up tenses, he mixes up particles. He was talking about the voices. Sometimes they were third person, sometimes it was they, sometimes it was it, sometimes he even said I at one point. So first person when he's talking about the voices in his head. So the grammar is chaotic. Serge has also played around with vocabulary, and most groups, you know, have their own, of this type, have their own jargon, and this is no exception. So Serge has distorted the meanings of a lot of words and inverted the meanings of a lot of words. But even when we talk about syntax, he even has a term for it. He calls it spherical. You know, that the way that he thinks is spherical because it's not rational. The alternative is this spherical thinking. The way he talks doesn't make a point. You know, you can sit there listening to this stuff, waiting for him to get to the point. But you know, he talks in circles, and so cognitively you're trying to follow, and it is confusional. And yeah, inverting the meaning of words. I mean, we'll get to this a little bit later, where he talks about love. But, you know, his idea of love is that it has no emotion. So, you know, whether you can still interpret that as love or not is... And judging by the way his group behave, which they consider to be loving, you know, to outsiders, it does not appear that way at all. Now, plus contradictions. He contradicts himself constantly, and you'll hear that. You've already heard it and you'll hear it again. I'll pick out a couple of a few examples that we've already heard. He talked about how he was fit and happy, but then he was in pain that he couldn't feel. So that's unusual, and he's managed to sell that to quite a few of his customers. Pain that they couldn't feel, pain that they weren't aware of, unconscious pain, you know. And there's a psychologist who's part of the group, a follower, long-term follower of Serge Benhayon, and his name is Brendan Mooney, and his Universal Medicine have this video of him talking about pain relief, how he received pain relief by going to Serge. And of course, when you actually listen to the video, he didn't. The pain got better of its own accord after it took about 2 years or something. But what Serge managed to convince him was that he was in pain because he was angry. And he had this kind of, it must have been very well repressed anger, because he wasn't aware of it, and nobody he knew was aware of it in his whole lifetime. So, you know, that's another quite, you know, effective sales pitch that Serge has been successful with. Right, so the other contradiction that he made, which you just heard, was about the voices that he heard. And I mean, you know, you wonder sometimes that, well, it seems at times that he's taking the mickey out of his followers, just as the voices, the alleged voices he heard, were taking the mickey out of him. They even told him, that's not us. So, you know, so, I mean, if he was hearing voices and that wasn't them, who was it? So, yeah, no, it all gets a bit peculiar, doesn't it? That the voices were feeding him false voices. So, and the other thing that he mentions quite a bit that you hear throughout, you'll hear a few times, and you hear it throughout his lectures, is him talking about free choice. You're here by free will and free choice. What you see on social media, you'll see throughout Universal Medicine's publicity, is his followers saying that Serge never tells us what to do. It's all our free choice, it's all our free will. Just as the voices he was hearing weren't telling him what to do either. They weren't instructing and they weren't imposing, you know. But they taught him everything. So, you know, these are contradictions. Serge might not overtly say, you should do this or you should do that. Same with the voices. Who knows what they were saying, but Serge never says, oh, you should eat, should not eat bananas because they're pranic. What he will say is that pranic things are loveless, and that they cause disease. You know, so what he does is demonize them very, very strongly, in very strong terms, demonizes the things that he regards as not esoteric. And so then his followers who've, you know, sat through these lectures where he's using these quite strong techniques of influence, both, you know, somatic, body, you know, hands-on influence techniques, linguistic influence techniques, strongly demonizes the things that, the behaviors that he doesn't want among his flock. And then they think that they've chosen, they've made their own choices. So, but what they also ignore is that a heck of a lot, thousands of people have also chosen not to follow universal medicine. Quite a lot more, you know, probably exponentially more people have chosen not to follow universal medicine than have. That's one of the things that they don't point out, is that in 2012 it was reported that about 15,000 people had attended universal medicine courses and events over the years. But, you know, their flock at the moment, Serge Benhayon's flock, is a few hundred. So there's a very big dropout rate, and people do make a free choice to get out. Now, the other one is that he mentioned before, is that these revelations, these powers that he has, clairsentience, is available to all equally. But, you know, later you'll hear in the recordings that he has a go at his followers because none of them have come anywhere near his level. So So he has this initiation scale, and I tell you what, nobody is equal on that initiation scale. Serge is at the top. He calls himself a 5th degree initiate, and on Earth he is the only one. He's the highest level human beings in these, on his initiation scale. And the Dalai Lama's slumming it at 4th degree, and then his followers sort of, scrabbling around below that. So equality, it's not equally available. The other thing he talks about with these free choices is that it's simple. It's easy to follow the esoteric way. But, clearly it's not, because nobody is reaching those higher levels. And it's not simple when you start talking about the spirit and the soul being two different things, and you start talking about feelings and emotions being two different things, and being able to separate them, and love having no emotion in it. These are not simple at all. So, right, so moving on from the linguistic technique, this technique of persuasion and influence that he has, which is very, very strong. The next excerpts will introduce us to the teachings. I'll talk a little bit more about them later, so you get a break from me. But he gets into his teachings. But so in the next recording, he starts talking about his students being on guard, and so here we've already heard him talking about disconnecting from families, hinting at that if you want to follow his path, the truth, if you want to follow the truth, then you might have to move on from your family. Now he starts talking about doubt, and he starts undermining doubt in a very big way, undermining doubt and doubters. And he does that not in any intellectual sense, he does it in emotional and spiritual terms. So let's listen to him talking about that.
The moment you hear something that is the truth that you want, you already know you're going to choose it because it comes with an energy that it's not exposing. The moment you don't hear that energy that is asking you to be responsible, you don't put up a guard. Now tonight, you are guarded. Very guarded. You have been all night. A little bit less now, because Natalie gave you a bit of a break in reading. But you're very guarded tonight, because you know that what I'm saying is the next level of energetic responsibility and dishonesty and arrogance. So there's an enormous guard, and when you have 250 people calling in a guard, it's a strong force that I have to offset in my auric field. That's why I had to take a break before, because it's quite strong. It's very difficult. You're sitting there, yes, you came here, it's free will, no one asked you to come here, and so forth. And those people listening to the audio will understand this and relate to this as well. But you've come here in the same way as I described earlier, measured. You're not going to your healing session and saying, I want it all out. That'll be the new thing. Sorry.
Next week.
Write that one down. Neil, that'll be the... Okay, so what you've come here to say, yeah, we're prepared to listen, but not to the extent of where you, Serge, have taken this speech tonight or the presentation tonight. And because you've already sensed at the beginning of the evening, before I opened my mouth, that I was in a certain energy that is there to expose your arrogance, your guard came up before you could even think. And your spirit does that because it can feel it. It can feel when there is a greater energy of love. It doesn't know what someone's going to say. The spirit can feel love. And when it feels an enormous amount of love, it knows there's something is going to happen or be said that is going to expose it. And it knows. It doesn't know what it's going to say, because no one can read minds. But Maitreya can. But it knows it's going to have a guard, and so it's already guarded. It's already ready to not let in what is going to be said. Why? Because you know you've been like that with your children, irresponsible and pranic. You know you have been like that with your parents. You know you have this private life that is pranic. You know you want to be an esoteric student, but you don't give it the whole full 100% commitment because you claim it is too hard. It's not too hard. It's just that you have to be more responsible, far more in integrity. And it takes an easy balance to live esoterically in the temporal world. It's very, very easy to live esoterically in the temporal world. All you need to do is not use the temporal world to give you your excitement. All you need to do is not rely on the temporal world to give you recognition and acceptance. Because the moment you use the temporal world to give you all of that, then you need to absorb it. You need to be stimulated. You need to be excited. You need to be saddened. You need to be happied. You need to have all the stimulations that the temporal world will give you. And the moment you let them go, you'll see that the esoteric life in the temporal world is actually very, very simple. In fact, it is too simple. And the reason we avoid that simplicity is because that will expose the level of arrogance and the fact that we have been choosing to be unloving all of this time. So what we want is an intellectualized, long email as to why things are happening. We want an intellectualized, complex problem, when really all it is that you are avoiding love.
Right, so when you go to these lectures, of course you're going to be guarded because the teachings they don't make sense, and they're quite antisocial. And I chose Esoteric Medicine 7 lecture because of the content. The content is pretty, it's pretty hard to take. I'm going to make a separate video where he talks about, some separate excerpts where he talks about the health of his mother in very disrespectful terms, and then he talks about the karma of disability in a very, very repugnant way. But in this audio that you're about to hear, you'll hear him talking about his theories about cancer, and how people who get cancer are really to blame for being ill. And he also continues to encourage disconnection from family and from society and from authoritative sources of knowledge. So in the next reading, we have Natalie reading from Natalie Benhayon, Serge Benhayon's daughter, reading from his self-published works. Natalie at the time was about 20, but she had been participating in these events and giving readings for a number of years. She introduces these teachings about the kind of occult beliefs in universal medicine, which I need to point out are not ever discussed in their publicity. So you'd think in over 30 websites, they have this vast number of websites with an enormous amount of written material on them, just a colossal amount of material written on them. They never ever mention the very essential parts of this business model, which... Sorry, I thought that someone was at the door. The very essential parts of this business model, which is the occult teachings and the teachings about energy. Now, the first thing, so you're going to hear Natalie talking about people being pranic and prana. Now, prana is traditionally, as the Sanskrit terms comes from Eastern Indian tradition, it translates as breath or life energy. Now, Serge Benhayon's interpretation of prana is that it's evil, and that prana holds you back. Life energy holds you back from uniting with these higher initiations, uniting with your soul and with God. He regards human life, humanity, the human body as impediments to this ideal, his ideal life, which is kind of wafting around as an entity somewhere with no emotions, no intellectual capacity, no senses, no body, no carnal body. So that's his idea of fun, isn't it? Not a lot of fun involved in that. But prana is evil. There's two types of energy in Serge's teachings, universal medicine teachings. Pranic energy is the evil one, and fiery energy, the energy of the soul, is the good one. And we'll find out later the soul is lethal. You can't come into contact. The soul exists outside of your body, but if you come into contact with it, it will kill you. And that's a blessing. It's a cleansing, apparently. Quickly, prana, the things that Serge Benhayon regards as pranic, are anything that, things that keep your body alive, things that make your life worth living and enjoyable, things that help you connect with people, especially people outside of universal medicine. Those things are what Serge Benhayon calls pranic. So a lot of nutritious food, root vegetables, grains, dairy products. There's lots of fruits and stuff that he regards as pranic. Bananas are pranic. So, he never says don't eat them, but what he says is, if you eat them, you're loveless. And if you feed them to your kids, you're just keeping them in a contraction and illusion, and you'll harm their reincarnations. So, he's sort of advocating this very restrictive diet. It's unsuitable for anyone, let alone kids. Emotions are pranic. Emotions are the cause of all disease, as far as he's concerned. So, music is pranic, apart from the music that's produced by his business associates. If he can't make money out of that music, it's pranic. The same with books. If he can't make money out of the books, they're pranic. So, but those are the things that help, enjoying music, enjoying literature. Those things help you to connect with other people outside of universal medicine. Emotionally, it's very, very difficult to function in relationships if you believe that emotions are the cause of all disease. You're going to have a lot of trouble expressing yourself. You're going to emotionally shut down. And this is what people who have to deal with universal medicine followers really struggle with, is that they're dealing with these emotionally shut down people who also have been told that intellect is an illusion, and that anyone who criticises them is kind of supernaturally possessed. We'll get into that in a moment. Spirit is another enemy of Serge Benhayon. So spirit and soul are two different things somehow. He's managed to kind of separate those two. So spirit, when anyone's doing anything that's not what he regards as esoteric, when people are doing anything pranic, then it's because they're, possessed by spirit. They're being run by spirit. So now, what you'll hear too is he starts talking about cancer being a choice to live lovelessly. So love has no emotion in it, according to Serge Benhayon. So his idea of love, anything, it's very, very black and white here. He's the source of love. He's the source of the meaning of love. He's the source of all truth. Love and truth are the same thing. So people who decide not to, people who are doing anything remotely pranic, you know, having an emotional engagement, or, you know, eating the incorrect foods or listening to the incorrect music, those people are what he calls living lovelessly, and so they're going to cop cancer. And so really what he's implying is that if you're emotionally engaged, if you're having, you know, normal functional relationships, that those things are harming you. And what you see is when people join universal medicine, that's when they will cut their families off. And there was a case in the news very recently where Serge Benhayon benefited from a cancer patient's estate to the tune of $1.3 million, whereas her own children got $250,000 each. Now, that patient was aware of, you know, she was aware of all these teachings, and she had blogged on Universal Medicine websites about how her life before Universal Medicine was all, you know, pretty much a mistake, you know. So, but this is really what she was doing, was just regurgitating what Serge had told her about her life, and she was just expressing the teachings that she'd learned. So, oh, and the other thing that causes cancer is male energy. It causes disease for women is male energy, so you've got to stay away from men too. Now, what we also get into, or what we've been hearing so far too, is that when Serge Benhayon wants to undermine critics and undermine competitors, he uses emotional triggers. He doesn't do it in any kind of reasonable, rational, or intelligent way. He uses emotional triggers. So when people aren't following, aren't behaving themselves, when people critic, he says that they're arrogant, that they're loveless, they're dishonest, they're not in their truth, they're not committed. So these things, he's using emotional triggers to influence his followers. And later we'll hear about the spiritual triggers. So we'll get into this next part where Natalie is speaking. Before we get to that, I'll read some excerpts from Serge Benhayon's writings on prana and esoteric healing. A true healing is one that arrests the prana, and not one that improves the well-being of the client by allowing them to exist better in the pranic form. The human being will eventually evolve to a body of light, and hence will not have a carnal existence on the physical plane. This is why the development of the inner light is our true path. Imagine the massive waste of energy and good resource that is being poured into something we will eventually all not need. Death is always a healing and not part of the failure.
In truth, the so-called good practice in those pranic modalities is insidious, that is, deceitfully harming those who are choosing to be energetically ignorant in favor of a relief or reprieve they may get to keep them going, but not stop their ill-causing behaviors. That latter exposes in full why such modalities have their place in our world. For there are many who prefer the symptom to be gone, the ailment to subside, or the whole issue buried and out of sight, so that one can return to the energetically ignorant life they are led or impulse to think is working for them, in the many ways it does. How does such deceit exist? In any form of pranic healing, such as in acupuncture, kinesiology, NLP, or Reiki, etc., the root ill energy, which is always pranic, has been shifted and or buried deeper so that it does not give off any symptoms or ills. Now consider that all symptoms, sickness, illness, and disease are the body's way of discarding excess prana. What then is the good in removing a symptom as the goal of the practice if the ill energy is not completely removed? Let's face it, as a race of beings to date, that is, the majority, will favour the removal of an offending, uncomfortable and or irritating symptom over looking at what caused it in the first place. The main problem here is that the root cause is never healed or removed, and thus it will resurface and return in another, more severe form later. It is precisely this choice or ignorance of the energetic truth that is the unseen deep problem in mankind and in the unadmitted passing on of illness and disease to each and every generation thus far. And hence, this is where we need to come to in our understanding of what is so very wrong in our world.
Right, so here we are getting into the conspiracy, the supernatural conspiracy that is anything that competes with Serge Benhayon's authority. You know, it's quite clear that he can't compete with conventional sources of knowledge and authority on an intellectual level, because he doesn't, you know, he didn't finish high school, so he doesn't have the knowledge. He has no scientific or medical knowledge, and this is very apparent from the way that he's talking about disease processes and the causes of cancer. He also misrepresents medicine, and he's constantly going on about how, you know, how disease, cancer's on the rise, which means that we're all living lovelessly, you know, according to him. What he never ever, and this guy has been promoted by, I think it's 8 medical doctors and at least half a dozen registered psychologists. You know, he's got all of these health professionals promoting him, and none of them will answer these questions about medical facts, one of them being that life expectancy has increased enormously in the last few generations, as has life, quality of life, for at least for first world people, you know. But let's face it, the first world is Serge's market. He's not interested in the plight of people of the second and third world, because they're not good consumers, you know. They're not going to become his customers. So you know, he's spreading these first world fictions that disease is on the rise, when it's actually a complete misrepresentation, when people are living a lot longer. Serge Benhayon's using some reliable New Age tropes as well, and one of those is that feeling is superior to intellect and reason, and there's a lot of money in that. You know, a lot of New Age authors have done very well out of discrediting science, discrediting evidence-based medicine, because, you know, it kind of democratizes healing, doesn't it? It means that anyone can do it. You don't need to have an education. And it's quite handy too, because in healing, with New Age healing, because they use the doctrine of karma and reincarnation, it's very, very handy. If you're not getting results, you can blame the person. Oh, and energy healing as well. If you're not getting results, if you can't actually do anything for their symptoms, which is hard work, you know. Anyone who's worked in healthcare knows how hard it is to really keep people well and to help their well-being and to cure symptoms, takes a lot of study, a lot of skill and expertise. But, in the New Age, people like to imagine themselves as healers. And if they're not getting results, then they can blame the person's energy, that the person is in the wrong energy. They haven't, behaved in a politically correct way. Patient blaming is, it's rife. If you have sickness and disease, it's because you haven't thought the right thoughts and felt the right feelings. If you're not getting well, it's because you've got some sort of energy resistance or a block. Your energy is blocked. So that's handy. Reincarnation's a handy kind of fallback position for New Age healers too, because people are sick, or people have misfortune because of stuff they don't know about, stuff they did in past lives. And so if you get sick, or even if you're not an angry person, it's because you were angry in your past life. And Serge Benhayon works that to the max, and it lets them off the hook. It means that they are not under, these New Age healers are not under any pressure at all to get results. And if they do get results, then they're quite happy to take, they're not getting the results. If the person has an improvement in their health, the healer is likely to take the credit. And what Serge Benhayon is doing, he's offering them benefits of his healing. You don't feel, if esoteric healing doesn't make you feel any better or improve your health at all, that's not even the point. The point is that you get the benefits in your next life, your hypothetical next life. So karma, reincarnation are really handy for New Age, in the New Age industry, New Age healing and feel-good industry. It beats having to do the hard work of dealing with uncertainty, and having to do a lot of study and develop a lot of skill. So, getting into science being a supernatural conspiracy, we're hearing about these enemies called the Lords of Form. The Lords of Form are imaginary, of course. They're these supernatural, Serge's supernatural enemies. And, they're a projection of Serge Benhayon's self-doubt, and his internal conflicts. They've become a projection for his whole group. Now, it's important to remember that none of these occult concepts make it into the universal medicine publicity. None of them are mentioned anywhere. This is all done, he teaches all of this stuff behind closed doors for good reason. Because there's no way people would line up for this stuff if they knew before they got there what this was about. So, in terms of doubt, self-doubt, a personality type like Serge Benhayon, he's basically intellectually pretty unsophisticated and uneducated, but he needs to be an authority, and a personality type like his can't function with healthy self-doubt. Now, we all need a bit of that to be able to keep ourselves in check and to make, rational decisions and sensible decisions that aren't going to harm ourselves and others. So, for someone like him, though, he can't function with these grandiose ambitions by having self-doubt, so he needs to project it externally onto his enemies. He does it to his actual enemies, like me and others, and, we're sort of described in terms of, in spiritual terms, that we're and emotional terms, that we're loveless and in pain and possessed by spirit, and entities, and God knows what. You know, they've called me the Dark Lodge or the Evil Lodge. So he needs to project that, but he's, you know, it's gotten so extreme that he has to project it onto imaginary enemies as well, and his followers believe in these imaginary lords of form. And really, the lords of form are just an embodiment of doubt. They're an embodiment of, you know, like a symbolic embodiment of Serge Benhayon's competitors. So anything that challenges universal medicine beliefs, you know, so intellect, reason, actual medicine, you know, these things are competitors to universal medicine, but of course they're controlled by these supernatural lords of form who, you know, are feeding you false truths. He even says false truths, whatever that means. They're feeding you those to guide you away, or to deceive you away from the esoteric truth. But, you know, the esoteric truth is only one source, and it's this ex-tennis coach who was a bankrupt and who was sitting on the toilet and heard voices. So, you know, this is this supernatural conspiracy, according to Serge Benhayon.
Their conclusion of the overwhelming number of women reporting with breast cancer or coming to terms with breast cancer is the fact that they are working with computers. Nothing to do with the way women are, nothing to do with the behavior, nothing to do with the way in which they sell out, nothing to do with any of that. If you understand that if we're supposed to give our power away to medicine or to some authority that then tells us that everyone uses computers, so that's what we're up against. And that's why the words are needed tonight for you to hear, to know how to speak, and you need to understand the psyche of those you are going to be in communication with. Because that person that hears that I got breast cancer because of a computer will love hearing it. And that's the problem. That's the real ill. The lords of form are very clever, because the greatest ills are hidden in the so-called truths, not in the obviouses. So the lords of form don't create breast cancer. We do. We do by adhering to living a life we're not. Therefore we accumulate prana, and in that prana the soul has to clear it. In the case of not nurturing, it becomes breast cancer. In the case of bearing your issues, it might be colon cancer. In the case of not accepting life and not moving on, it might be stomach cancer. In the case of not dealing with your disregard, it may end up being in the liver through the blood. So liver tumours in your liver. So how we use that prana is just prana. How we use it personally then converts itself into a personalized version of itself in our body. And therefore, when the soul says, I'm love, it doesn't say, I'm going to give you breast cancer. It says, I'm love. Now, how have you used that non-loving energy in your body? That non-loving energy in your body has to find a path out of your body. And so if you are a woman who hasn't nurtured, then the pathway out of that prana for you is a tumor or a lump in your breast that is cancerous. And below that is the self-loathing that is carried in the ovaries as a result of not feeling that you are worth nurturing. But that's how a woman in that case has used prana.
Now, the other thing you might have picked up on in the lecture is the sexism, and unfortunately in this lecture it's not covered very much. Hearing is that breast cancer is a problem of self-nurturing, you know, women who fail to self-nurture, and you know, they have to do that without emotion. And also what he's implying is that caring for your family emotionally is at the expense of self-nurturing. But in other universal material, and I might have to do another presentation on esoteric women's health, a whole separate thing, the sexism is very pervasive. So, you know, esoteric women's health modalities are based on the idea that women's diseases are caused by imposed male energy, you know, and also that emotions are the cause of disease. So functioning emotionally comes at the expense of your health. And but these ideas are completely derogatory to everybody. So for a start, you know, he talks about maleness. You know, his attitude towards men is that they're insensitive, unfeeling, that women are emotionally superior to men. You know, another contradiction. Women are superior, they're stronger, and that men, you know, are basically sex-crazed animals. Whereas his idea of femaleness, you know, has to have no male energy, which in his terms is any kind of intellectual activity, vigorous exercise or sport is regarded as being in male energy. But he also wants women to disengage emotionally. So, and he has these ideas about the way women should dress and groom themselves. So this is pretty primitive stuff. These are pretty primitive sexual stereotypes. You know, Serge Benhayon isn't just appointing himself, you know, an authority on love, you know, the authority on love, the authority on truth, the authority on medicine, but he's also the authority on gender, sex and gender identity. You know, and this is a problem, and it does cause problems among the followers, because these stereotypes cause conflicts. When you start sort of picking on people and judging people for the way they behave and whether or not they're being they're in their maleness or in their femaleness, it's very, very divisive. So this is where he's been able to exploit the gender war in order to kind of, it's another way that he monopolises the attentions of his followers and create enmity with outsiders. That's this us versus them mentality that pervades universal medicine. And just to perhaps reiterate, the other competitor for universal medicine, because Serge basically, his need in order to expand his empire and realise his grandiose ambitions, he needs his followers' complete loyalty. He needs to monopolise a lot of their consumption and a lot of their energy. So, you know, he wants them to only spend on universal medicine, and he wants all of their emotional and spiritual focus. So the other competitor, and this is why he is demonising of emotion, the other competitor for universal medicine and Serge Benhayon is family, relationships. If people are spending time and expending emotional energy and devotion to family and friends, that's all devotion that he feels should be directed at him. And that's really what all of this undermining is all about. is his need for this monopoly, you know. So we'll listen to the rest of this, and at the end I'll just run through the main points.
The same prana can be used by a different woman in a different way, and she may not get the breast cancer, but it'll still be the same way of living and making choices in a way that is not loving, and those behaviors, those choices will accumulate a series of emotions and repeated acts and so forth, and thoughts that then accumulate a certain amount of prana in a particular part of the body that will then have to have its pathway removed. And so that's the difference between breast cancer and colon cancer, or stomach cancer and a brain tumor. It's just how you individualize the prana in your body. It's not that the soul says, okay, I'm giving you breast cancer and I'm giving you brain tumor. The soul just says, here's love. That's it. And then your body has to find a way to clear itself of what is not love. And then where it ends up being an ill in your body is dependent on how you use that prana in your body. Does that make sense? That's super important, because that is the pathway to illness and disease, and that's why we get illnesses. So, the laws of form, no, they don't give us illness and disease. They just make the attractions so that we can fall for the individualizations. In other words, they provide the beliefs and ideals that keep us in the arrogance and the dishonesty. So they know they don't create breast cancer. You created it. It's your free will. They don't have the karma. It's beautiful and it's perfect. But what they do love getting into is influencing a mind that can actually say, computers are the cause, or the wires you live under are the cause, or the microwave, or this food, or that food. Because that is what retards us from actually getting to the point of saying, well, then why do we get breast cancer? Well, then why do we get breast cancer? Why do we have so much cancer? What has gone on since 2000? Why is this rapidity happening? Why is this intensity? We are not free to think. Why? Because if we were free to think, we would think like I do, I guess you could say, free from the pranic consciousness. Plug for Serge. But if you were free to think, you would come up with the answers. The reason you're not free to think is because you want the dishonesty to be fed. You want the arrogance to be kept as it is. So you're looking for the next bit of information to feed it, to keep you where you are, so you don't have to be called for your irresponsibility. So can you imagine that for a lot of people, not you guys of course, but what you need to understand is you're living in a world where the information that says breast cancer is caused by a computer is championed, is needed, and it's going to become a truth that's going to be researched. It's going to borrow money from the charities, and there's going to be 1, 2, 3, maybe 50 scientists at 80 grand a year or 100 grand a year, whatever they get paid, to investigate it over the next 5 to 7 years. And because they're under the impulse of that, they're going to come to some form of conclusion that there is an influence of computers over breast cancer. And then that's going to become a new saying we're going to pass to the next generation that comes, and that's a new truth that we will subscribe to. That is what the Lords of Form get into directly, because that is what sabotages us more than anything else. Not so much the behaviors. That's easy because you're asking for them. They just feed the energy, you know that. But what they do get involved is to make sure that you don't hear the truth of what is really going on. And there's always an empty scientist. There's always an empty politician, always an empty whatever academic, always an empty guru, teacher, whatever, who's willing to put out there the truth that they impulse, so that truth, pranic truth, becomes the truth that all the spirits who are waiting for truth to come to them that won't expose them. Now can I give you a really big revelation? We've only been baby ones thus far. Okay? Grab your seats like that. Okay, for those of you hearing this, pull over now. Get this. When you hear... Why are you laughing? You don't know what I'm going to say. She enjoys it when I nail you. Okay. Not nailing them particularly.
I know.
Natalie. Just everyone at the same time. Okay. When you hear... Listen to this. Remember I said earlier you can't stop feeling energy? Everyone feels energy, correct? So when you hear computers cause breast cancer, it's an absolute delight to the spirit. Because no energy in that which has just been said asks the spirit to be responsible. And so you endorse the possibility. So the Lords of Form know exactly what they're doing when they give out these false truths. So once again, they say to Sanat Kumara, but we didn't do it. We just said it. They chose it. Not our karma. You can't come into the dark lodge and do away with us because we haven't broken any law. We're free to say what we want. They wanted that energy. The energy of untruth is what they want. They're choosing it, not us. They wanted to hear that. Look at them, they're smiling. Chat between the Lords of Form and Sanat Kumara. Look at them, they're smiling. All we said is it could come from computers. We're allowed to say that, it's our free will. We're allowed to say whatever we like. Are we not, Sanat? He says, yes, I love you anyway. They know the rules, right? But can you see how it works?
Okay, so winding up now. So we started out with a man talking about hearing voices while he was sitting on the toilet, and how these voices impulsed him, and how he developed, kind of special powers and special knowledge from this spiritual revelation. Now, so we heard him talking about that, and we heard how this impulse made him then this authority on love. He's the authority on love. He's the authority on truth and knowledge. He's the source of one unified truth and knowledge. He's also the source of authority. He's the authority on gender, sex and gender. So the amazing thing about this revelation is, in any other context it would be probably diagnosed as a pathological event. However, Serge Benhayon has performed this kind of amazing feat of salesmanship and turned it into a successful international business with a very devoted following. So, and so we've looked at the way that he influences his followers, and the role that these lectures and these teachings play, and his lecturing style, his linguistic technique. We've looked at the role this plays in him realizing his grandiose ambitions to monopolize the financial expenditure of his followers and their emotional and spiritual devotion. So we've looked at that. Now, and the way that he does that, because he's not intellectually sophisticated, is that he has demonized the intellect, that he has undermined and literally demonized critics, critical thinking, and competitors. And the way that he does that is to frame any kind of opposition in emotional and spiritual terms. So critics, competitors, critical thinking is, he's described it as arrogant, dishonest, and loveless. He also has undermined relationships. He's encouraging emotional shutdown. He's telling his followers that emotions are the cause of all disease, and this, of course, undermines their relationships with anyone outside of universal medicine, their families and their families and their children. So he's basically cleaving this kind of emotional devotion away from families towards him and his group and his business. We also heard him, we also, were given an introduction to his teachings, denigrating life and humanity and human connection. So all of those things are what he regards as pranic, evil, and his glorification of death, so that death becomes something that his followers even look forward to, because he persuades his clients that death is not something to fear. Then they're more likely to hand over a bequest, generous one. So the whole idea anyway is that this person who had this, this guy who was a bankrupt, he was a tennis coach, and he had this kind of spiritual revelation, and then developed a whole lot of grandiose ambitions. He seeks to monopolize his followers, financially, emotionally, and spiritually. And he does that by attempting to make enemies of any competitors or competing ways of thinking. So I think that about winds it up. Thanks for listening.